Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a US elections update special. I'm going to be concentrating on policy and the lack of knowledge concerning policy with one of the candidates and the projection onto the other candidate that is essentially a lie about the other candidate and reflective indeed of the characteristics of the first candidate. So my thesis is, and I believe this more and more with each passing week, and I can't believe it is so overtly obvious that people aren't talking about it enough. But my thesis is that Donald Trump doesn't actually have the knowledge to run for president of the US. And I have said this for a long time. I think he's actually ideologically vacuous, which means that he doesn't have strong convictions on any particular one thing. I think immigration he probably does, but outside of that, even abortion, right? I think I wrote an article back in 2016 about him having or I mentioned it in several articles about him having 5 different views on abortion in basically the same week, because he just wants to say what he thinks most people that he's appealing to want him to say. And actually, he is an empty vessel that can be filled up by the people around him. And this is what happened in 2016. He kind of accidentally won this election where he wasn't really expecting it. And then they kind of panicked. They threw together a bunch of people, including Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, who are still there now in the background, but these people were kind of feeding him with ideas and whatnot. And he was the bombastic one, Trump, that said basic, vague things that triggered people either in a good way or a bad way. Like they're either like, yeah, that's the kind of person I want to be leading my country, or that sucks, that's insane. But actually, he's never been someone who's big on detail. And now, 8 years later, where he has had, I think, some cognitive decline, he is someone who really, really doesn't know about policy, and he does not know enough to run the country. And he keeps getting asked, or not keeps getting asked, he actually rarely gets asked these questions, but when he does, he absolutely flails. When he's asked directly about things that he should know stuff about, he starts flailing. We are going to go to an interview that is essentially a softball interview. I think she's a Fox News. Is she Fox News? Anyway, this is a full measure program where Cheryl Atkinson speaks to, sorry for getting the name wrong initially there, speaks to Donald Trump. So this should be a softball interview. And she asks him something that he should be prepared for. This should be something that he sat down with his advisors and he has a pat answer for. That he doesn't now, considering this is one of the major issues in the election at the moment, is staggering. Like, he fluffs and prevaricates and delays and then comes in.
Kamala Harris has been very short on specifics when it comes to economy, other than saying she wants an opportunity economy. What are the specific mechanics of how prices come down? You know, the steps that would be taken in a second term for you.
Sure. Right. And I'm going to do what I normally do. I'm going to interrupt this. Right. His answer should be, right, what are you going to do to bring prices down? Tell me how you are going to reduce inflation. Now, someone that doesn't really have a very clear idea of that, whether it's going to be monetary policy or fiscal policy, he'll talk about tariffs, but there are all these different ways. Well, there aren't actually that many ways, I would argue, interest rates and so on and so forth, but there aren't all that many ways a government can easily control, especially one that advocates free market economics, can easily control this. But that should be part of your answer. But the problem is, by saying that, you're admitting that actually inflation was largely a global thing, a market thing, and not an American thing, and therefore blaming global economic trends for high inflation is to let Harris and Biden off the hook. And of course, he can't do that. But I don't think he's clever enough to even begin to elucidate those sorts of things. Honestly, Donald Trump is not even a very successful businessman. when you look at his track record. As the Forbes article once said, if he had just invested his inheritance in the S&P 500, he would have more money now than he has. But that inheritance went on pretty bad business deals where it's been fined and taken to court, and Trump University owes $25 million or whatever. He's gone bankrupt 6 times in different areas. So I just don't think he's nearly as knowledgeable on pretty much anything as people think he is. And when it comes to running a country, you need to have your wits about you. You need to know economics, macroeconomics, microeconomics. You need to understand foreign diplomacy and the history of diplomacy that in order to influence your current diplomacy. What have you learned from history not to do in this particular situation? I think he doesn't read, right? So you got someone that doesn't read in the most important position in the world, and it's not a good recipe. Now here he's just been asked, how are you... Kamala Harris hasn't given us enough detail, and we'll come on to that in a second. Can you give us detail about how you would reduce inflation?
So, first of all, she can't do an interview. She could never do this interview because you ask questions like, give me a specific answer. She talks about her lawn when she was growing up. This woman is not...
He's delaying, prevaricating, and he's projecting onto her his own problems. He's saying she can't do the interviews like this because you ask a specific question. She can't answer a question. She starts talking about lawns and that. He's doing exactly that. He's going... Anyway, tariffs or whatever.
Not equipped to be president. She's not equipped to deal with President Xi.
Projection.
I took in hundreds of billions of dollars with him. And Putin, we had no war with Putin. Remember, and I'm just going to go off.
Remember, he was asked to talk about how you're going to control inflation.
And Putin, we had no war with Putin. Remember, and I'm just going to go off just for this. With Bush, they took a lot. Russia. With Biden, they're trying to take everything. With Obama, they took a lot.
They took... What are you talking about? With Bush, they took a lot. With Biden, they took a... What?
With Trump, Russia took nothing. Just remember that. It's a little chart. But what happened, and when you look at what took place, was so sad. When they took over...
Just listen to... I've got primary progressive multiple sclerosis. I really struggle with the way I construct sentences and finding the next words, and my brain has to work overtime in order to follow a train of thought that I have. He's got my issues times 10 here. Just his train of thought. Just listen to where he goes.
They took a lot. With Trump, Russia took nothing. Just remember that. It's a little chart. But what happened, and when you look at what took place, was so sad. When they took over, they cut the oil way down, and oil started going through the roof. It was going to go to $10 a gallon. It was going to go to numbers that nobody's ever seen. And so they went back to the Trump drilling. They said, let it go back. That was the only good thing, but they stopped. Because I would be there, but 4 years later, I would be triple what the number was. Right now, they're just about even where I was.
And of course, he's completely underplaying what the truth of the matter is that the Biden administration is producing more oil than any other country in the history of the earth, full stop. So they have taken US oil production to a massive level. They're also buying it back to refill up those strategic reserves. And this has been one of the things they've done to bring inflation under control to some extent. Gas prices down, energy prices come down. It affects the cost of stuff. And he's saying, yeah, and this is the first time he's actually admitted that the Biden administration has sort of done that. But he said, I would have done it just way more. As the record levels they're producing, I would have done that times 3.
They only did that because of the fact that they eventually have an election coming up. And you remember at the beginning...
That's absolutely untrue. They've been doing that. If you're talking about oil production, for an awful long time now. You look at what they've done in response to OPEC, OPEC Plus, and Russia. Just he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Right now, they're just about even where I was. But they only did that because of the fact that they eventually have an election coming up. And you remember at the beginning what happened. That's one of the reasons that Putin went in, because it went to $100 a barrel instead of $40 a barrel. And he could fight all the wars he wants with those kind of numbers because he's a big seller of oil and gas. So what happens is they went back to what I was doing, just said reopen, just reopen. It wasn't hard. It's so crazy what they want to do.
Honestly, I think I know what he's talking about, but I'm not sure. Like, what do his words mean here? Honestly, if you are someone that still thinks this is a guy that should run the US, I feel sorry for you. Like, what is going on in his head?
Yes. So what happens is they went back to what I was doing. Just said,
where's the clarity? What were you doing? Are you talking about drilling? Are you talking about producing more oil here? Is that what you're talking about? Are you talking about flooding the market with strategic reserves? Like, what exactly are you talking about?
So what happens is they went back to what I was doing, just said reopen, just reopen. It wasn't
reopen.
Hard. It's so crazy what they want to do. They're going to destroy lives. They're going to destroy what they have done to this country. And especially,
what are you? I still don't know. Like, they want to go back to what they want to reopen, but now they're destroying. What are you actually? What do you mean? You've been asked how you are going to get inflation down in the US, and you're talking about destroying lives and Putin and Biden and
just reopen. It wasn't hard. It's so crazy what they want to do. They're going to destroy lives. They're going to destroy what they have done to this country, and especially in the sense of allowing millions and millions of people come in, because that's...
Oh, now we get onto immigration, which is the classic pivot. So you've asked me something on inflation, so blah, 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 Putin, blah, 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 drill, baby, drill, blah, 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 immigration. So immigration. That's why I want to talk about immigration. Fricking, how are you going to control inflation? And if it is about drilling more oil, can you explain that? Can you explain how that? You are speaking to the audience here. They might not understand that might have something to do with inflation. You're not taking the audience with you. You are just, your brain is just going Putin, oil, immigration.
Something, we can fix the gasoline situation, and we can fix the anything.
Do prices come?
When you say we can fix the gasoline situation, I think I know what you mean, as in gasoline prices are too high. But like, you are just splurging like words and half-formed ideas here.
Millions and millions of people come in, because that's something, we can fix the gasoline situation, and we can fix the anything.
Do prices come down magically because it's not them?
They come down with energy, and they come down with...
Watch how she's trying to get him back on track. Like, let's get on to talking prices here.
We can fix the gasoline situation, and we can fix the anything.
Do prices come down magically because it's not them?
They come down with energy, and they come down with interest rates. We're going to get, as I told you, we're going to get energy down by 50% in 12 months. We're going to have it. It's going to be a major smash on energy. If you look at the energy and I'm not just talking about cars, I'm talking about air conditioning, heating, your basic energy, operating a bakery, operating any kind of a business. It's all having to do with energy. That was where they started wrong. When they cut way back on what I did.
So again, okay, I understand that your answer is how you're going to get prices down. We're going to reduce energy by 50%, energy prices by 50%. Like, that's an What's your policy? Oh my God, sorry to go back.
Conditioning, heating, your basic energy, operating a bakery, operating any kind of a business. It's all having to do with energy. That was where they started wrong. When they cut way back on what I did, and again, just so you understand.
And that's what they got wrong. When they cut back way back when I did. Like, honestly, you transcribe this, you write down this complete answer, and you get someone to read that out, you will understand how this guy hasn't got a Scooby-Doo what is going on in his own head is just falling out of his mouth without any kind of syntax, any kind of grammatical rules. He's just vomiting half-formed ideas.
Business, it's all having to do with energy. That was where they started wrong. When they cut way back on what I did.
That was when they started wrong. Then he finishes that idea, and then you go, like, honestly, just think about this. Think about what's going on here. This is your presidential candidate, nominee for the Republican Party.
Being a bakery, operating any kind of a business, it's all having to do with energy. That was where they started wrong. When they cut way back on what I did.
What?
And again,
What
just so
did
you understand,
do?
they then let it go back to where it was, which was
what are you?
a very smart thing. Otherwise, you would have had.
What are you talking about?
I think you would have had a depression, if you want to know the truth. But energy was rising at a level that nobody had ever seen. And then they said, go back, go back. They were telling people, go back.
Energy was rising. Do you mean the price of energy? Energy prices were rising at a level nobody had ever seen. I want you to substantiate that claim, because I'm not 100% sure that's true.
Your wells, go back to drilling, go back to fracking, do whatever you have to do. But if they win, the day after, they're going all the way. They were only doing that because of an election coming up. They're going all the way. It's madness.
They've been doing that for 4 years.
What they've done to our country is mad.
I'm wondering, looking back at you sitting out for 4 years, basically, at least, is there a benefit to that in terms of you being able to see, maybe to read?
Interesting. So she didn't hold him to account. That was his answer. That was his answer on policy to curtail inflation. Blows my mind. And this is why you get people like, is it McGaskill here, saying the following.
And that's the other thing. You know, it just drives me crazy, these Republicans saying, well, it's his policies. He can't put 3 sentences together about his policies. He gets a question about manufacturing in Michigan, and he goes on 10 minutes about countries that have a nuclear weapon. It's like, what? I mean, he isn't cogent about his policies, and I'm not sure these people even know what his policies are. All I know about his foreign policy is he loves dictators. That's all I know.
Well, and David Jolly, Bret Stephens cares a lot about foreign policy. There's not a single person who saw Donald Trump in the sit room who's voting for him again. There's not a single person who saw Donald Trump in the tank briefings where the Pentagon briefed him on operations and crises who's voting for him again. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, gave a fiery speech saying that in America we don't swear an oath to a king or a dictator. We pledge an oath to the Constitution. There is not one person who saw him up close in a military or national. General Kelly, who was his chief of staff, said that he's the, quote, most damaged person he's ever seen in his life. Rex Tillerson, who was his Secretary of State, called him a moron. Bob Corker, Senate former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, said that the West Wing resembled adult daycare. You find me anyone who thinks that Donald Trump is a good bet on anything related to U.S. national security, and I'll send you a box of donuts.
And she's talking about national security there, but the same can be said about the economy. Like, he's got these kind of half-baked ideas, but there's no detail. There's no granular detail about how he's going to do that, because he doesn't have the ability to form those ideas. He doesn't have the requisite knowledge. And this kind of false equivalence, or in his case, the projection he did, but other people give a kind of false equivalence, like they're both talking policy, as if like Kamala Harris's exposition of her policy agenda is in some way equivalent to his exposition, when his exposition is just bleh. And she actually gives cogent ideas and at least some granular detail, and then people accuse her of being vague, but not him. He is graded on a curve, as so many people say. He is just not held to the same levels of account that, in this case, Kamala Harris is.
When people work hard and have a dream of buying a home, we should give you the opportunity to be able to do that, which is why part of my plan is for first-time homeowners, buyers, to have a $25,000 down payment assistance to buy your first home. Because people just need to be able to get their foot in the door, and then you'll do the hard work.
So,
Part
granular
of
detail.
My plan is to give startup small businesses a $50,000 tax deduction to start up their small business. Right now, it's $5,000. Nobody can start a small business with $5,000. So that's part of my plan. Because here's the thing. We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing, and the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children. We are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term.
All right. To Stephanie's point, you don't like the answer. Is that enough for you? What you need to do is compare that to direct questions Donald Trump has been asked on how he would handle various issues, including bringing down the cost of child care, water conservation in California, and threats to manufacturing in Michigan.
So, we are going to compare policy detail. We've heard some from Kamala Harris. I mean, it's enough to be given in a public auditorium like that. You know, she's on the chat show, or not chat show, but she's with Oprah Winfrey doing a kind of town hall. That's the kind of detail you would be expecting to give. You can go into longer weeds than that, I'm sure, but it's time and a place. So when Trump is asked for his policy ideas, does he answer in a comparable way? Who has a better grasp of these ideas and these policy details?
Take a listen.
Can you commit to prioritizing legislation to make childcare affordable? And if so, what specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Again, ask for specific piece of legislation. Now, she was interviewed after this, I think on CNN, and she excoriated Trump for this answer. You had these four men, I think, clapping his answer, which is, this is absolute word salad. And this goes back to what we've already heard. And then we're going to move on after this to the farming debacle, as I see it.
Well, I would do that. And we're sitting down, you know, I was somebody, we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so
specific childcare legislation.
It's a very important issue. But I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that because
what numbers?
Childcare is childcare. It's couldn't, you know, there's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country.
So asked about childcare, his answer is tariffs.
Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including childcare. So you have millions.
And by the way, that went on and on and on. I played that video to you before. It is an absolutely astonishing example of someone vomiting nonsense that doesn't answer the questions. And he goes and talks about dictators and this and that, and then tariffs. And so his answer to what specific childcare legislation would be, that his answer was childcare isn't as expensive as the money we would get back from tariffs. So tariffs. That's not answering the question. And yet he, in that previous interview we just heard, said that Harris can't do interviews like this because she can't answer specific questions. That is projection. She can answer specific questions. It is you who cannot.
Millions of gallons of water pouring down from the north with the snow caps in Canada and all pouring down. And they have essentially a very large faucet. And you turn the faucet, and it takes one day to turn it. It's massive. It's as big as the wall of that building right there behind you. And you turn that, and all of that water goes aimlessly into the Pacific. And if they turned it back, all of that water would come right down here and right into Los Angeles. They wouldn't have to have people not use more than 30 gallons and 32 gallons. They want to do that, they're trying to do that. And you have so much water, and all those fields that are right now barren, the farmers would have all the water they needed. And you could revert water up into the hills where you have all the dead forests, where the forests are so brittle.
What do you see as the major threats to the future of Michigan manufacturing, auto working jobs, and what will you do to eliminate those threats, sir?
Okay, so I'll get into another little bit of a long answer, because when you say major threat, to me we have one really major threat. That's called
auto working jobs in a battleground state. What are you going to do about threats to those jobs?
nuclear weapons.
Oh.
We have other countries that are hostile to us. They don't have to be hostile to us. I always say if you have a smart president, you'll never have a problem with China, Russia, or any of them, okay? I got along great with Putin. I got along great with President Xi. I got along great with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Everybody said, oh, you can't get along with him. He liked me. I got along great with him, and he has a
Answer the freaking question.
lot of nuclear force. But you essentially have 5 countries, and you're going to have more. Whether you like it or not, you're going to have more. It's the single biggest threat to the world, not only Michigan, to the world. And you're not going to care so much about making cars if that stuff starts happening.
Just, here's a question. We want granular detail on a specific subject. Go off and talk about immigration. Go off and talk about tariffs. Go off and talk about dictators. Do not answer the question. Fluff around, probably because you have no ability to answer that question. You could be given 20 years and you wouldn't be able to come up with a cogent answer because you don't have the requisite knowledge. Now, we're going to go on to and talk about requisite knowledge. We're going to go on and talk about farmers. So he had this this meeting yesterday where he was questioned, sitting in fact in front of 2 John Deere tractors concerning farmers.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you and a special group of people, the farmers. Nobody's done for farmers what I've done. Unfortunately, they haven't followed through. We made a deal with China. It was one of my best deals that I made. I made a lot of good deals, but we made the USMCA, Mexico, Canada, which was terrific.
We're going to be talking about the USMCA in a second. But he said no one's done more for farmers than I have. And actually, farmers lost billions of dollars because of exactly what he did in the trade war with China. And we'll look at that in a second. So straight away, he either doesn't have a grasp of policy impact or he's lying.
But we had a specific deal with China where they were going to buy $50 billion worth of farm product. And it's interesting how we got there because when the negotiation was going on, and it was a nasty negotiation, and I said to the farmers, just stick with me because we're going to do it. They're great negotiators. They're not going to go that fast. Just stick with me because you never had anybody negotiating for the farmers before me as president. And my people...
And he's just constantly like, how can I answer this where I look amazing? So it's like no one's ever seen figures like this. No one's done as much for the farmers as I've done. No one ever negotiated on behalf of farmers before I existed. Farmers were forgotten people. It's like, what are you? You're just talking nonsense. Now, there's 4 minutes of basically that. But the long and the short of it is that he is going to put 200% tariffs on things like John Deere tractors. So listen to this.
I just noticed behind me John Deere tractors. I know a lot about John Deere. I love the company. But as you know, they've announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States, so that if I win, John Deere is going to be paying a 200%. They haven't started it yet. Maybe they haven't even made the final decision yet, but I think they have. John Deere is going to, and anybody else that does this, because it's hurting our farmers, it's hurting our manufacturing. And if you do that, you're going to have a 200% tariff put on the product that you make in Mexico, right across the.
Now, this is, in my opinion, insane. And it again just shows that he doesn't really know what he's talking about. So, American farmers buy John Deere tractors, right? It is kind of like staple of their business, tractors. And John Deere is one of the big ones, right? So, John Deere want to minimize costs, and we'll talk about this in a second. So they go and build or do some part assembly in Mexico. And then Trump is going to say, hey, this is how I'm going to help you farmers. I'm going to put a 200% tariff on John Deere. So those tractors you are buying is going to be 200% more expensive now. And as we know with tariffs are prima facie, in a very simplistic way, it is more complex, because what you try and do is put tariffs on to try and get other manufacturers in your own country to be able to outcompete by producing a barrier to entry into the markets by putting prohibitive tariffs on them. But if you want to buy a John Deere tractor, that farmer now has to spend loads more money, which means that if they want a John Deere tractor, they are paying that tax. The farmer's paying that. John Deere isn't, because if you still buy them those tractors, then that 200% tariff is not sunk by the John Deere manufacturer, it's sunk by the consumer, who is a farmer. So the farmer ends up paying for that until you get the long-term project here would be to get other manufacturers building in the US, or John Deere coming back, but then there'll be huge expenses in bringing that manufacturing back into the US. And so the reason they went there was to save money. So this is about saving farmers money. So whichever way, however you interpret what happens with the tariffs, and whichever way you look at it, long or short term, it will just be more expensive for the farmer. Now, here is some interesting explanation about what was going on with Trump.
I want you to watch something, and I'm going to show you an example of someone not having a clue what they are doing with policy.
Do you know that right now, and they weren't building them with me, they weren't building anything in Mexico having to do with cars with me, because I said, if you build it, we're going to put a 200%, you're not going to sell one car into this country. And
that's Donald Trump talking about U.S. automakers moving to Mexico. And him saying that he told them, if you go to Mexico, we're going to put a 200% tariff on everything coming out of your country, right? That's what he's telling people. So what is one of the big reasons automakers are moving to Mexico? The USMCA. Additionally, U.S. automotive manufacturers are making...
So the USMCA is, remember, what Trump just said that he sorted out when he was in power. So this is Trump's thing.
U.S. automotive manufacturers are making the move to Mexico due to the USMCA incentives. Per the automotive provision, companies are offered reduced tariffs or possible duty-free trading as long as 75% of the components are manufactured in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Where did the USMCA come from? It is literally Donald Trump's free trade agreement that replaced NAFTA. It is Donald Trump's free trade agreement that promised Mexico and Canada that if automakers moved there, that as long as they bought the components from one of those three countries, they would be relieved of 75% of the tariffs or be completely duty-free. And he's claiming he told them he was going to put a 200% tariff on cars coming out of Mexico, when it's literally his policy, his trade policy, that removed all of that. He doesn't have a clue what he's doing. He probably does not know one word that is in the USMCA. Thanks.
And there you go. I couldn't have put it better myself. So I then shared that. Someone came back to me, John Deere, so talking about tractors, not cars, was going to try to ship those jobs overseas no matter what. Not only did Trump get them to limit their sites to North America with USMCA, but then with the 200% additional tariffs, kill the whole move. Dude in the original movie must have Trump derangement syndrome and want America weak. And I was like, mate, which is then to admit that Trump is entirely misrepresenting the whole thing, right? John Deere had to put up prices due to inflation, due to Trump's trade war in 2019. And we'll look at that in a second. So much for the GOP extolling the virtues of the free market, right? So due to a trade war of Trump having with China and Chinese steel coming in and tariffs, John Deere had to put their prices up. Things were becoming too expensive. Then Trump did the USMCA to attract people to go to certain countries like Mexico or Canada to go and construct things there, because he's reducing tariffs and reducing barriers to entry to make that's part of a free trade agreement. So there's your free trade bit. He's saying, please go to Mexico because we've done this deal. So John Deere go, right, you put up the cost of steel for us due to your trade war. But luckily, thank you very much, you said, but you can go and make this cheaper in Mexico, which will not have a trade war with China and will not have tariffs on steel. So John Deere then go to Mexico. And then Trump says a couple of years later, screw you, John Deere. I can't believe you went to Mexico. We're going to put 200% tariffs on your kit. And like that, hang on. We only did this because you made it too expensive to do things in the US in the first place. And then you made it cheap for us to go to Mexico and told us it was a good thing to go to Mexico. And now you're punishing us for going to Mexico, which is exactly what you said for us to do in the first place. So which is I say here, which is to say, 1, incentivize manufacturers to move abroad by whacking on tariffs on Chinese steel. 2, incentivize manufacturers to move abroad with the USMCA. 3, punish manufacturers for the above with a 200% tariff on their goods. Trump is a genius. And then when you look at the claim that Trump says this, you know, this is his claim, remember?
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you and a special group of people, the farmers. Nobody's done for farmers what I've done.
So nobody's done more for farmers than what I've done. Statista says US farmers lost billions in the Trump era of retaliatory tariffs. In fact, you can see this is only written, I think, in response to his claims here. The Statista guys have said US farmers lost billions to Trump era retaliatory tariffs. The farmers were the people who lost most with the trade war with China. Absolutely incredible that he would say no one's done any more. In fact, what he had to do, if you remember, he started this trade war and then had to subsidize the farmers. He had to give them handouts because the decisions he had made had screwed them over so badly. Just incredible. As if he's some kind of free market, or the GOP, indeed, is some kind of free market entity advocating for the free market. It's like this is industry protectionism and then handing out government subsidies. It's like both of those things are the opposite of the free market. So it just blows my mind. This guy is clueless. And then he comes up with harebrained ideas like this. As Adam Kinzinger said, he's honestly just insanely dumb. Dumb as a rock. He really honestly is.
I'm curious what you think the future of crypto looks like if, God forbid, you don't win the election.
What does the future of cryptocurrency look like if, God forbid, you don't win the election?
Crypto, what does it look like? Well, I think it's a good future. You know, who knows about anything today?
By the way, he knows nothing really about crypto. And so this is all fluff. It's just, I think it's a good future. Who knows anything about anything these days?
You know, who knows about anything today? But I think it's a good future. I'll tell you what, you look at values, you look at what's happening and where it's come and where it came from. I think crypto's got a great future. I think it...
Meaningless twaddle. Listen again to his words.
Good future. I'll tell you what, you look at values, you look at what's happening and where it's come and where...
You look at values, what's happening, where it's come, where it's come from.
I think
it's got a great future.
Maybe we'll pay off the $35 trillion in crypto.
And by the way, just listen, the guy that asked him the question actually realizes that he hasn't answered the question and tries to ask it again, to which Trump overtalks him and says, we're going to pay off the debt with crypto. What?
A great future. I think it really does. Maybe we'll pay off the $35 trillion in crypto. How about that? I'll write out a little piece of paper, 35 trillion crypto. We have no debt, right? That's what.
People are laughing at that. People are clapping. He might as well have said, we're going to pay off the debt with cheese. We're gonna mine the moon because it's made of cheese. We all know it's made of cheese. We're going to mine the moon, bring it all back to Earth, and we're going to sell that cheese and we'll pay off all the debt. He hasn't got a clue what he's talking about, and people clap that. Meanwhile, the guy that asked the question knows he hasn't answered it.
I like it, right? He likes that idea too. He's laughing. Yes.
He's laughing at your idiocy, right? That you're going to write. I mean, yeah, a great joke. Yeah, you're going to write a piece of paper paying off $35 trillion of US debt with crypto. That's what I like. Okay, you've been asked a serious question. Give us a serious answer, but you can't. Anyway, going back to the tariffs, it's again interesting with John Deere. This Atlantic article from 2019 was really interesting. So the unexpected side effects of Trump's trade war. Farm income is down. I've done more for farmers than anyone else on earth ever. Farm income was down, equipment prices are sky high. As part of the article says, the trade war almost couldn't have come at a worse time for the agricultural industry. Farm debt is on the rise. Farm income is at a 3-year trough, and the American Farm Bureau Federation's chief economist said last month that many farmers are dependent on off-farm income to keep their operations running. But farmers can't push pause on their crops to try to wait out the trade war. They're at the beck and call of the planting and harvesting seasons. So this is right in the middle of Trump's tenure. He's screwed over the farmers, and yet he's forgotten all that. 2024, no one's done more for farmers than I have. Quote, everything's going up in price, but also the cost of labour is going up, says Taylor Brooks, a salesperson for Boyd's local equipment dealer, James River Equipment in Tappahannock. For now, Boyd, the founder and president of the National Black Farmers Association, has decided to spend about $2,600 on parts and fix a combine himself. If he were to pay someone else to do it, he estimates it would cost him about $8,000. Some large equipment manufacturers, including John Deere and Caterpillar, announced almost immediately after the tariffs were implemented last summer that they would raise their prices to adjust for the higher price of steel and aluminium imports. So this is what I said. They had to raise their prices because of Trump's tariffs. It's not just large manufacturers, though. Small, locally based equipment manufacturers have also had to raise prices or look elsewhere for steel. In Montana, a horse trailer manufacturer was forced to hike prices by about 20% last summer because of the tariffs. Bank of America Merrill Lynch downgraded John Deere's stock in February, citing, quote, a real risk to farm equipment demand if the trade war continues. Many farmers are precluded from buying new agricultural equipment because of a combination of higher prices and lower profits, but that puts them in a catch-22. Farmers replace the equipment only every 5 to 7 years. Those who are going to replace it this year now can't afford to, are forced to repair it instead. And because steel costs are up, so too are the costs of the replacement parts. Quote, when commodities aren't being sold, farmers don't have cash, says Vernon Schmidt, the executive vice president of the Farm Equipment Manufacturers Association. Schmidt works with specialized equipment manufacturers, not tractor and combine producers, and he said the tariffs are affecting the manufacturers he works with in much the same way. So, John Deere, screwed over by the trade war. Then the USMCA comes along. Newsweek has just released this today in answer to Trump's nonsense. Donald Trump's John Deere threat has a problem. The USMCA Act he signed, right? So John Deere are like, right, everything's too expensive. People can't afford to buy our equipment. So they're just replacing it, but repairing it, but even that's too expensive because of the cost of steel. What can we do to make our equipment affordable for the farmers who are getting screwed over because of the trade war that affects them not only in this way, but also in like soy farming and tariffs and blah, blah, blah. What can we do to get our John Deere tractors being bought again? We need to reduce the costs. Okay, so Trump then goes USMCA. So there you go. They've announced a few days ago they're going to move a manufacturing business into Mexico, he said, and all that kind of stuff. However, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, signed by Trump in January 2020, a replacement for NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, prohibits the leverage of tariffs on a range of goods, allowing companies to manufacture in Mexico and Canada and export back to the US without high costs. So literally what he planned to happen. unless he's just signing stuff that he hasn't got a Scooby-Doo about, which is also eminently possible, plausible, probable even. I don't think he understands stuff. If Trump wanted to slap higher levies on John Deere and any companies vying to make similar moves, he would need to repeal the agreement. Withdrawal of trade agreements requires action from Congress. Of the production, and he was challenged on this, where he was asked about Congress, and he said, I think they'll do that. What was his answer? It was completely vague and like, yeah, we're going to have Congress anyway, so they'll do this. Just absolutely insane. And anyway, you know, so on and so forth. You can go and read the rest of that article if you want. But my point is this, is that if you are serious about voting for this guy, just have it be known that he evidently doesn't have a clue about the things he needs to know about. And what's worse, he doesn't seem willing to learn. This is what, was it Adam Kinzinger was saying about him? He's like, he doesn't want to improve his knowledge base. He's not willing to read about the subject. He's not willing to listen to people who are going to give him the requisite knowledge. He just drives on with his lack of knowledge. And someone who's not willing to improve their own lot, in order to improve the lot of the country, is not the sort of person that you should have as president. Just, it blows my mind that this guy is given the credibility that he is. That he isn't called out. Like, if I was that reporter asking him those questions, I would say, sorry, Mr. Trump. Sorry, Mr. President. But I couldn't really understand your answer. And I asked you this really simple question. Can you please answer this question as explicitly as you possibly can? Because the viewers out there really need to know how you are going to reduce the cost of their goods. How are you going to tackle inflation? Likewise with the childcare answer. I'm sorry, Mr. President, but you really didn't answer the question there. What specific childcare legislation are you going to introduce? And of course, he can't answer the questions because he doesn't know. Why would you vote for someone that doesn't know? I know, because immigration. Because immigration is doing the entirety of the heavy lifting in the GOP campaign. And he tries to pivot on every answer to immigration. We see him do that, and we've seen it in one of the examples that I've given you here. That's his safe space. Oh, she's asked me something difficult. Putin, immigration. And then everyone goes, oh yeah, immigration. Oh, those horrible immigrants. And of course, that's inflationary. His answer to the problems, the woes of the US are tariffs and deportation, both of which have huge inflationary pressures. So when asked, what are you going to do about inflation? He sort of bumbles around talking about energy, but is essentially saying exactly what the Biden administration is doing anyway, but times 3. And immigration and tariffs. Okay. So really, you're going to do 2/3 of that is doing stuff that's going to make it worse for the person and their groceries. Well done, you. Anyway, rant over.